I came home 3 days early from my final business trip carrying an $80,000 diamond ring for our 40th wedding anniversary. I couldn't wait to surprise my wife. But the moment I stepped out of the airport, my attorney called. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "I'm heading home," I replied. Suddenly he shouted, "No, don't go home. Check your security camera immediately." My hands began to shake as I opened the live feed, and what appeared on that screen made my entire world stop. Welcome, and thank you for choosing Revenge Dad today. It means more than you know. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country, I want to know. Note, some elements of this story are fictional, added for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental. The message, however, is something I believe you needed to hear. The ring box sat in my left breast pocket like a small stone pressed against my heart. I could feel it with every step I took through Terminal 4 at JFK. A slight weight, a constant reminder of why I had cut the Los Angeles trip 3 days short. $80,000 of white gold and diamond wrapped in black velvet custom, ordered from a jeweler on Fifth Avenue back in June. I had described exactly what I wanted to the man behind the counter. Classic setting, round cut, something that looked like it had been made to last. He had smiled and said, "Anniversary piece." I had nodded. 40th, I told him. He had set down his pen and said that was something worth celebrating properly. I believed him then. I was 60 years old, and I had spent 35 of those years building Carter Construction from a single crew and a borrowed equipment trailer into one of the most recognized construction firms in New York. I had poured foundations in the Bronx in January sleet. I had managed projects in Lower Manhattan when the ground still smelled of smoke and grief. I had shaken hands with mayors and argued with inspectors, and once spent 4 straight days on a job site in Queens because the steel delivery was wrong and I refused to leave until it was fixed. I knew how to handle hard things. What I did not expect walking through the terminal that Tuesday morning, with a ring in my pocket and a bouquet of Linda's favorite white peonies waiting in a cooler bag over my shoulder, was that the hardest thing I had ever faced was already happening 12 miles away in our house in Greenwich, Connecticut. My phone buzzed. Michael Grant. Michael had been my attorney for 22 years. He had a voice like old oak solid, measured, never excitable. In 2 decades, I had never once heard him sound the way he sounded when I pressed the phone to my ear. "William." His voice came through tight, clipped. "Where are you right now?" "Just walked out past baggage claim," I said, shifting the cooler bag on my shoulder. Heading to the car, I wanted to surprise Linda, so I didn't call ahead. Figured I'd just stop. The word hit like a hand pressed flat against my chest. "Don't go home. Don't get in the car yet. Find somewhere quiet right now. A corner, a wall, anywhere away from the crowd. And open the security app on your phone." My feet slowed on the polished floor. Around me, the terminal churned, rolling suitcases, reunions, a child shrieking with laughter as she ran toward a woman crouching with open arms. Normal Tuesday morning at JFK. The whole world moving forward on schedule. "Michael." I kept my voice low, and even the way I had learned to speak on job sites when something had gone wrong and I needed the crew to stay calm. "Talk to me. What happened?" "Just open the app, William." His breath was unsteady on the line. "Please, open it and look at the living room camera. And God, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to be the one making this call." The apology hit me harder than anything else he could have said. Michael Grant did not apologize for things that were not serious. I stepped out of the main foot traffic and pressed my back against a column near Gate 4. My fingers found the security app by muscle memory. We had installed the system 2 years ago, after a break-in 2 streets over in Greenwich. I had set it up myself on a Saturday afternoon, while Linda made coffee and Ryan helped me run the cables. The app loaded. I tapped the living room feed. The picture was clear, high definition, time-stamped 9:47 in the upper right corner. Linda was standing near the couch in the cream blouse she wore, when she wanted to look effortlessly elegant. Her arms were around a man I did not recognize, tall, dark jacket, silver at his temples. They were not embracing the way old friends do, with a brief press and a step back. They were standing together the way people stand when a room belongs to both of them. Close, comfortable, unhurried. My chest cavity seemed to contract around my lungs. Then the man leaned down and kissed my wife, and Linda lifted her hand and placed it against his jaw. And I stood in Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport with a bouquet of white peonies over one shoulder, an $80,000 of anniversary ring over my heart, and I could not feel my fingers. I gripped the phone harder. That was when the kitchen door on the camera swung open and my son walked in. Ryan, 32 years old, my only child. He was dressed in the dark blazer he wore when he had client meetings, confident stride coffee cup in hand. He crossed the room without hesitation, extended his right hand, and shook the other man's hand with a grin I recognized from every Christmas morning of his childhood. "Dad's got 3 more days," Ryan said, his voice carrying easily through the audio feed. "We've got plenty of time." The man nodded. Linda laughed a soft, relaxed sound and reached for a glass of wine on the coffee table. 3 more days. They had counted the days. They had planned around my schedule, factored in my travel itinerary, calculated exactly how much time they had before I walked back through my own front door. My throat tightened until swallowing became a conscious act. I watched the screen for another 90 seconds without moving. Not because I could not look away, because I was forcing myself to observe rather than react. I counted details the way I counted details on a job site when something looked wrong, the 3 coffee cups on the table, not 2. The bakery box from the place on Greenwich Avenue that Linda only ordered from when she was in a good mood. The way Ryan dropped into the armchair like a man completely at ease in that particular arrangement of people. This was not the first time. I could feel that truth in my chest the way you feel a structural fault before you can see it. A wrongness in the load distribution, a vibration that should not be there. My phone buzzed again, Michael calling back. I picked up. "I saw it," I said. "William, I saw it." My voice came out steadier than I deserved credit for. My hand, however, was pressing the phone so hard against my ear that I could feel my pulse in my jaw. "Who is he?" "I don't have a full picture yet. That's why I need you to listen to me very carefully right now." Michael's voice dropped lower, more deliberate. "Do not go home. Do not call Linda. Do not call Ryan. Can you do that?" The cooler bag with the peonies was suddenly very heavy on my shoulder. "I can do that," I said. "Good. Get yourself a car to Midtown. Come to my office. I have things to show you, and we need to talk before you do anything else." I stood at that column for another 10 seconds after the call ended. The terminal flowed past me, businessmen, families, a soldier in uniform, wheeling a duffel bag, a couple walking hand in hand toward the exit doors. Every one of them moving towards something. I reached into my breast pocket and felt the edges of the ring box under my fingertips. I had 2 choices standing there. I could walk out those doors, get in the car, and drive to Greenwich and demand answers from the 2 people in that house who thought they had 3 more days. Or I could put the ring back in my pocket, find a car to Park Avenue, and learn everything there was to learn before I said a single word. I had built Carter Construction on one principle above everything else: never break ground until you understand exactly what you are building on. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket. I set the cooler bag with the peonies down on the row of seats beside the column, gently, carefully, the way you set down something that no longer belongs to the moment you are in. Then, I pulled out my phone again and called Michael back. "I'm on my way," I said. The cab smelled like pine air freshener and old vinyl, and I sat in the back seat watching Manhattan grow larger through the windshield, without really seeing any of it. Normally I loved this approach. The way the skyline assembled itself as you crossed over from Queens, first the outer boroughs, then the bridges, then suddenly the full weight of the city pressing itself against the sky. I had driven this route hundreds of times over 35 years. I had watched buildings I constructed rise into that skyline from nothing, and every time I crossed into Manhattan, I felt something that was not quite pride, but was close enough to it that I had never bothered finding a more precise word. Today the skyline looked like a wall. My phone sat face down on my thigh. I had not turned the security camera back on. I did not need to see it again. The image of Ryan shaking that man's hand and grinning that particular grin, the one I recognized from Little League games and college acceptance letters, and the morning he closed his first real estate deal, had already taken up permanent residence somewhere behind my sternum, and I was fairly certain it was not going anywhere soon. The cab driver said something about the Midtown tunnel being backed up. "Fine," I said. "However you need to go." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror once and did not try to make conversation again. Michael's office was on the 19th floor of a building on Park Avenue that had been there since 1962 and looked like it intended to stay another 60 years. Grant Legal Group. The lobby had dark wood paneling and a security desk and the particular hush of a place where serious things were discussed at reasonable hourly rates. I had walked through those doors for 2 decades for contract disputes for a zoning battle in Brooklyn that nearly broke us for the incorporation papers when we restructured the company 8 years ago. The afternoon had quieted by the time I arrived. The receptionist had already gone home for the day. Michael met me himself at the elevator. He looked older than the last time I had seen him, which had been 3 weeks ago, over lunch at a steakhouse on 44th Street. His silver hair was pushed back from his forehead, like he had been running his hands through it, and his tie was loosened, and when he saw my face, he pressed his lips together and exhaled slowly through his nose. "Thank you for coming straight here," he said. "Tell me what you know," I said. "All of it, right now." He put a hand briefly on my shoulder, a gesture so uncharacteristic of Michael Grant that it made my chest hurt worse than anything else had so far, and then he turned and led me down the hall to his office. 2 mugs of coffee sat on the desk already poured. A thin folder lay beside them. Michael sat down and folded his hands on top of it and looked at me with the expression of a man who had been rehearsing what he was about to say and still was not sure it was going to come out right. 3 weeks ago, he began, "I was reviewing the refinancing documents for the Westchester project. Routine review, nothing you asked me to do. I was just cross-checking some figures before the closing." He paused. "I found a signature, William, on the authorization page. It was your name, but it was not your signature." The coffee mug was warm in my hands. I set it down carefully so I would not squeeze it. "You're certain," I said. "I have 22 years of your signatures in my files." Michael opened the folder and slid a page across the desk, a side-by-side comparison, 2 signatures, both reading William J. Carter. Even to my own eye, the difference was visible once you knew to look for it. The loops were slightly too even, the pressure too consistent. "I'm certain," he said. I stared at the 2 signatures until they blurred slightly at the edges. My jaw had tightened to the point where I could feel the tension all the way up into my temples, and I made myself unclench it deliberately, the way my dentist had been telling me to do for years. "When did you find this?" I asked. 3 weeks ago, like I said." Michael's voice dropped. "I didn't call you right away because I needed to know what I was actually looking at before I put something like this in front of you. So I reached out to someone I trust." He turned his laptop around to face me. "His name is Ray Okafor, former NYPD Financial Crimes Unit, 12 years on the force, another 12 in private practice. He specializes in complex financial fraud cases in New York. I've used him twice before on corporate matters. He's very good and he is very discreet." On the screen was a photograph, a solidly built black man in his late 40s, close-cropped hair going gray at the sides, the kind of face that gave nothing away unless he chose to give it. "What did Ray find?" I asked. Michael exhaled. "I asked him to do a preliminary review of your joint accounts and your business accounts. Just a look, nothing invasive." He pulled another page from the folder. 4 weeks ago, a transfer was made from your joint investment account, $8,500, sent to an LLC registered in Delaware, no employees, no business address, no operational history whatsoever. 8,500, I repeated. "Under 10,000, Michael said. That's important. Under federal law, specifically the Bank Secrecy Act, financial institutions are required to file a currency transaction report for any cash transaction over $10,000. Breaking transfers into smaller amounts to avoid triggering that report is called structuring. It's a federal crime in itself, separate from whatever the money is being used for." He tapped the page. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This was not an accident." My back teeth ground together hard enough that I heard it. "How many transfers?" I said. "Ray found 6 so far, all under 10,000, all to the same LLC or its subsidiaries. He's only had 3 weeks, he said. This is likely the surface." Michael looked at me steadily. "William, I need to ask you directly. Did you authorize any transfers to a company called Halcyon Asset Management LLC?" "No," I said. The word came out flat and absolute, the way concrete sounds when it sets. "I have never heard of that company in my life." Michael nodded slowly as if that answer confirmed something he had already known. "There's one more thing." He reached into the folder and produced a printed screenshot, a still frame from a camera feed. The timestamp read 3 weeks earlier. My driveway in Greenwich. A man walking toward the front door, while Linda held it open smiling. The same man from the living room camera, the same silver-templed profile. "Ray identified him," Michael said. "His name is Victor Hale. Ray is still building the full picture, but what he has already is significant." He paused. "William, how much do you actually know about who your wife has been spending time with?" The question landed in my chest like a dropped tool on a concrete floor, a loud, reverberating clang that I felt more than heard. I thought about the past several months, the charity functions Linda attended alone because I was on job sites or in meetings, the weekends she had filled with plans that never quite involved me, The way she had begun gradually and without fanfare to exist in a slightly different orbit than the one we had shared for nearly 4 decades. I had attributed it to the natural rhythm of a long marriage, two people who had built a life together and no longer needed to explain every corner of it. I had been a fool. "Tell me what Ray knows," I said. My voice had dropped low and very quiet the way it got when I was keeping something under control that very badly wanted not to be controlled. "All of it, tonight. He's on his way here now." Michael checked his watch. "Should be another 20 minutes. I stood up from the chair because I could not sit anymore and walked to the window and looked out at Park Avenue 19 stories below. Yellow cabs, a woman walking a dog, a couple arguing in front of a restaurant, their breath visible in the cool September air, neither of them looking at each other even as they spoke. The ring box pressed against my chest. "Michael," I said without turning around. "Whatever this is, whatever the full picture looks like when Ray gets here, I need you to understand something." I pressed one hand flat against the cold glass of the window. "I am not walking into that house until I know exactly what I'm walking into. Every detail, every name, every number. I want the complete picture before I say one word to either of them." Behind me, Michael said quietly, "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." I kept my eyes on Park Avenue and breathed slowly and thought about the 3 days Linda and Ryan believed they still had. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about several things. I intended to find out about all of them. 3 days in a hotel 12 blocks from your own house teaches you things about yourself that you would rather not know. I had stayed at the Archer on West 35th Street, a clean, quiet place with good blackout curtains and room service that arrived without conversation, which was exactly what I needed. I had slept badly each night, waking at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning, to lie on my back, staring at a ceiling that was not my ceiling, listening to the particular silence of a hotel room that has housed 1,000 strangers and remembers none of them. Each morning I had ordered coffee and scrambled eggs and read the Wall Street Journal without absorbing a single word. Each evening I had sat in the desk chair by the window and gone over everything Ray had brought to Michael's office on that first night. The transaction records the photographs, the preliminary timeline that Ray had assembled with the careful, unsparing precision of a man who had spent 24 years finding things people tried to hide. By Friday morning, I knew enough to be afraid of how much more there was still to find. I pulled into our driveway in Greenwich at 4:43 in the afternoon. The house looked the same as it always had, white colonial black shutters, the oak tree in the front yard that Linda and I had planted the year Ryan started kindergarten. It was taller than our roofline now. I sat in the car for a moment and looked at it and felt something shift uncomfortably behind my ribs. Then I picked up the new bouquet of peonies I had bought from a florist in Stamford on the way, because arriving without flowers after a long trip would have been out of character, and I could not afford to be out of character right now. And I got out of the car. Linda opened the front door before I reached the porch steps. She was wearing the blue cashmere sweater she saved for days she felt good about. Her hair was done. She was smiling with a particular warmth of a woman who had been waiting for someone she was glad to see. And when I climbed the last step and she reached up to put her arms around me, I held her the way I always had, one hand between her shoulder blades, the pressure firm and familiar, and I breathed through the sensation of my own heart hammering against the inside of my chest, like it was trying to get out. "You look exhausted," she said, pulling back and studying my face with what appeared to be genuine concern. Her fingers brushed my cheek once. "Was the last push brutal? Long weeks," I said. I held out the peonies. "For you." Her face lit up, and for one terrible fraction of a second, she looked exactly like the woman I had married in June of 1983, and the pain of that nearly buckled my knees. "They're beautiful." She took the flowers and pressed her nose into them. "Come inside. Ryan stopped by earlier. He went out for a bit, but he's coming back for dinner." "Good," I said. "I'd like to see him." The house smelled like it always did, cedar and the particular brand of candle Linda had burned for years, and coffee that had been sitting on the warmer too long. I set my bag down in the hallway and stood for a moment, cataloging the room, the way Ray had taught me to catalog things over those 3 evenings in Michael's office systematically, without rushing starting from the left. The living room couch cushions had been plumped and repositioned. Not the way Linda arranged them. She always put the larger ones in the back corners, but flatter, more symmetrical. Someone had straightened them in a hurry and not quite gotten it right. On the kitchen counter, a dish towel was folded over the oven handle. I had hung it through the handle on the left side for 30 years. It was on the right side now. On the coffee table, a ring of faint circular watermark on the wood recently buffed, but not quite gone. Someone had tried to remove it. 3 cups of coffee. Someone had washed them. But if you knew where to look, you could see the faint traces of grounds in the drain basket. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the counter with my back to the room and breathed in through my nose for 4 counts and out for 4 counts, a trick my father had taught me when I was 12 years old and too angry about something to think straight until the shaking in my hands stopped. "Tell me about the trip," Linda called from the dining room where she was putting the peonies into a vase. "Did the Henderson project wrap up the way you wanted?" "Mostly," I said. "A few things to follow up on remotely, but nothing that can't wait." I turned around and leaned against the counter and watched her arrange the flowers with practiced ease. "How was your week?" "Oh, quiet." She smiled over her shoulder. "The Hartwell Foundation dinner on Thursday was lovely. I ran into Barbara Collins from the Historical Society. She wants us to sponsor the spring gala again." She placed one stem slightly higher than the others and tilted her head. "I told her I'd ask you." "Sure," I said. "Whatever you'd like." She beamed at me, and I smiled back, and the distance between who we were in that kitchen and what I had seen on that camera felt like standing on opposite sides of a canyon so wide I could not see the other edge. Ryan arrived at 6:15. He came through the back door, the way he always did, calling out, "Dad's home," in the sing-song tone he had used since he was 17, like he was announcing something that needed to be celebrated. He was dressed in jeans and a gray Henley, now more relaxed than the blazer he had been wearing in the camera footage, and when he came around the corner into the kitchen and saw me, his face broke into a wide grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. My eyes, people had always said. Ryan had my eyes exactly. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and grabbed my hand and pulled me into a hug, slapping me twice on the back, the way men do, when they are genuinely glad to see each other. "You look good, Dad," he said, stepping back and squeezing my shoulder. "L.A. agreed with you. Los Angeles always tries to sell you something," I said. "I just try not to buy it." Ryan laughed a real laugh, easy and bright, and went to the refrigerator and opened it and said, "Please tell me Mom made the lamb." And Linda said, "Of course I made the lamb, don't be ridiculous." And the 3 of us stood in the kitchen of the house I had lived in for 31 years and moved around each other with the frictionless ease of people who had done this particular dance 10,000 times before. It was the most alone I had ever felt in my life. We ate dinner at the dining room table. Linda had set it properly cloth napkins, the good water glasses, the candles she only lit when the occasion felt worth marking. Ryan talked about a mixed-use development project in Jersey City he was pitching next month. I asked the right questions in the right places. Linda refilled my water glass without being asked the way she had always done. At one point, Ryan looked up from his plate and found me watching him. Something flickered across his face there and gone so fast, I might have imagined it a quick tightening around the eyes, a fraction of a second, where his jaw went slightly rigid. Then the grin came back smooth and familiar. "What?" he said. "Nothing," I said. "Just glad to be home." He held my gaze for exactly 1 beat too long before he looked back down at his plate. After dinner, I helped clear the table, and Ryan stayed for another hour, and at 8:30, he said he had an early morning and kissed Linda on the cheek and shook my hand at the door. I stood in the doorway and watched his taillights disappear around the corner of our street, and the September air was cool on my face and my chest ached with something I did not have a clean name for. Not quite grief, not quite anger, something that lived in the space between the two. Later in the upstairs hallway, I passed the fireplace shelf and my eyes caught on a framed photograph I had walked past 1,000 times. Sophie's college graduation 4 years ago. She was wearing the blue cap and gown, both arms raised, face split open with joy, and I was standing beside her with my arm around her shoulders, grinning like a man who had just watched something he helped build reach its full height. I stopped and looked at it for a moment. Linda had not come to that graduation. A headache, she had said. I had driven up alone and cheered loudly enough for both of us, and Sophie had hugged me afterward and whispered, "You're the best Uncle William." And I had told her she had no idea what she was capable of yet, and I had believed it completely. I touched the edge of the frame once lightly and then walked to my room. Linda was already in bed reading. She looked up when I came in and smiled and said, "It's good to have you back." And I said, "It's good to be back." And I changed and got into bed and lay in the dark, listening to her breathe, slow and steady beside me. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand. A text from Ray Second, phase complete. Significant. "Call me tomorrow, not from the house." I read it twice, set the phone face down, stared at the ceiling that was my ceiling, in the house that was my house in the bed I had slept in for 31 years. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, I would call Ray. Tonight, I would lie here and remember how to breathe. I told Linda I had a lunch meeting with a contractor in the city and drove the 40 minutes into Manhattan with the radio off and both hands on the wheel. Ray had chosen the meeting place, a coffee shop on West 47th Street called Brewers, tucked between a dry cleaner and a luggage repair shop, the kind of place that had been there since 1987 and had no interest in becoming anything else. 12 tables, no music. The kind of ambient noise that swallowed conversations whole. Ray Okafor was already in the back corner when I arrived, 2 coffees on the table, a closed laptop beside them, and a manila folder that was noticeably thicker than the one Michael had shown me 3 days ago. He stood when he saw me, not out of ceremony, but because he was that kind of man, the kind who stood when someone entered a room. "Mr. Carter?" His handshake was firm and brief. "Sit down, the coffee's fresh." "Ray?" I sat across from him and wrapped both hands around the mug. "Tell me what you found." He did not ease into it. I had already decided I liked that about him. "Your son," he said, and opened the folder. The first page was a spreadsheet, 2 columns of dates and dollar amounts going back 38 months. Atlantic City charges, hotel receipts from the Borgata and Harrah's, wire transfers to accounts Ray had traced to a sports betting platform operating out of a jurisdiction that made prosecution complicated. Las Vegas hotel charges 6 separate stays in 14 months. Always midweek, always the same 2 properties on the Strip. I looked at the numbers without speaking. My coffee cooled beside my right hand and I did not pick it up. Ryan has been gambling heavily for approximately 3 years. Ray said his voice level, and without judgment, the way a doctor delivers a scan result. The frequency increased about 18 months ago. The amounts got larger. He started making decisions that suggest someone who is no longer gambling for entertainment. He tapped the spreadsheet. He's been gambling to try to win back what he already lost. That's a different animal entirely. "How much?" I said. "Total losses I can document approximately $900,000 over 3 years. Ray turned to the next page. "The debt is a separate number." My stomach dropped so fast, I had to press my back against the chair to keep my posture straight. "He borrowed," I said. "From an organization operating out of Newark, New Jersey," Ray said. "They present themselves as a private lending company, Keystone Capital Solutions. The name sounds legitimate. The operation is not." He slid a page across the table, a printout of a business registration, an address in Newark, a list of officers that Ray had already cross-referenced against 3 separate federal databases. "Loan sharking," he said directly. "Illegal high-interest lending with enforcement tactics that go well beyond anything a licensed lender would touch. The FBI and the New Jersey Attorney General's office have had this organization on their radar for approximately 2 years, but proving the criminal enterprise requires testimony from borrowers, most of whom are too frightened to come forward." I picked up my coffee, put it down again without drinking. "How much does Ryan owe them?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. $1.2 million, Ray said. "As of last month, the interest compounds weekly." He let that number sit in the air for a moment before he continued. "He has approximately 4 months remaining on his repayment window before the terms of the agreement change in ways that I would prefer not to describe in detail, but that you should understand are serious. $1.2 million. My son. My only child, the one whose college graduation I had attended in a suit and tie on a Thursday afternoon, the one I had taught to throw a baseball in this same city 30 years ago, was $1.2 million in debt to a criminal lending operation in Newark, New Jersey, with 4 months left before something that Ray was too professional to describe out loud happened to him. The coffee shop noise continued around us. 2 women at a nearby table were arguing cheerfully about a movie. A man in a delivery uniform was eating a sandwich by the window. The world was proceeding at its normal pace, and I was sitting in the back corner of a 40-year-old coffee shop on West 47th Street, while the ground opened up beneath everything I thought I knew about my family. I pressed my hands flat on the table, felt the cool laminate surface against my palms, focused on that. "Ryan didn't find Victor Hale," I said. It was not a question. A picture had begun assembling itself in my mind with the cold mechanical clarity that sometimes came to me on job sites when a structural problem finally revealed its source. Not the way I wanted to see it, but clearly. Victor found Ryan. Ray's expression shifted, a small tightening around his eyes that, on a less controlled face, would have been a wince. "That's correct," he said. "Victor Hale has a method. He identifies individuals who are financially distressed and socially connected to significant assets. He approaches them through intermediaries, in Ryan's case, a man Ray had already identified who moved in the same Atlantic City circles. The introduction appeared accidental. It was not. He used Ryan to get to Linda, I said. My jaw had tightened so hard that the words had to push through it. Or he used Linda to get to Ryan. Which was it? Both, Ray said carefully. The timeline suggests Victor and your wife were already acquainted when he made contact with Ryan. But Ryan's debt gave Victor leverage he wouldn't otherwise have had. Ryan needed money. Victor offered a solution. The solution came with conditions. He paused. Your son did not walk into this freely, Mr. Carter. He walked into it desperate. That is a meaningfully different thing. I understood the distinction. I was not sure sitting there with my hands flat on a laminate table in a coffee shop on West 47th Street that the distinction made me feel any better. Show me the rest, I said. Ray reached into the folder and produced a photograph taken from a distance, grainy, with a particular quality of surveillance equipment, but clear enough. Ryan in a parking structure in Atlantic City. A man I did not recognize standing close, handing him what appeared to be a document. Ryan's shoulders were pulled in his head, slightly bowed, the body language of a man who had stopped believing he had options. My throat tightened so suddenly and so completely that I had to breathe through my nose twice before I trusted myself to speak again. My eyes burned, not quite tears, but close enough that I blinked hard and looked at the window for a moment and waited for the feeling to pass. That was my son in that photograph. 32 years old in a concrete parking structure in New Jersey, hunched over a document from a criminal lender, looking like a man who had already given up on himself. I had been in Los Angeles picking out diamond rings. Mr. Carter, Ray said quietly. His voice had dropped in a way that had nothing to do with professional distance. I'm sorry. It's all right, I said. My voice had come back steadier than I deserved. Keep going. Ray cleared his throat. There's one more thing in this section before we move on to Hale himself. He turned to the last page in the Ryan segment of the folder, a series of text messages printed and time-stamped from numbers Ray had traced to the Keystone operation. The language was careful, nothing overtly threatening, nothing that would hold up in court on its own, but the meaning was unmistakable to anyone who understood how these organizations communicated. We appreciate your continued commitment to your obligations, a reminder that our terms are time-sensitive. We look forward to your response by Friday. They've been sending these for 6 weeks, Ray said. 2 to 3 per week. Ryan has not responded to any of them. Because he doesn't have the money, I said. Because Victor Hale told him not to, Ray said. Victor told Ryan to stop responding, to let Victor handle the communication. He looked at me steadily across the table. Victor inserted himself between Ryan and his creditors. That is not an act of generosity, Mr. Carter. That is how you make someone completely dependent on you. The last piece clicked into place with an almost physical sensation. A structural connection snapping into alignment load suddenly distributed in a way that made the whole shape visible. Victor had not simply wandered into our family and found an opportunity. He had built a door, measured it precisely to fit the weakest point in the wall, and walked through it at a time of his own choosing. I sat back in my chair and looked at Ray Okafor across the table, and felt something cold and clear and very focused settle into the center of my chest. Not anger, anger was too hot, too imprecise. Something quieter than that. Something that knew how to wait. Tell me about Hale, I said. Everything. Ray reached for the second folder, the thicker one, and set it on the table between us. You're going to want more coffee, he said. Ray gave me the second folder at the end of our meeting and told me to read it somewhere I would not be interrupted. I drove back to Greenwich with it on the passenger seat and did not open it until Linda had gone to bed. I waited until I heard the particular creak of the third floorboard in the upstairs hallway, the one I had been meaning to fix for 6 years. And then I waited another 20 minutes after that, sitting at my desk in the study, with the folder in front of me and a glass of bourbon I had not touched. Then I opened it. The first page was a photograph. Victor Hale at what appeared to be a rooftop party in Los Angeles. Late evening city lights behind him, an easy smile on his face, his arm around a woman in her late 50s who was looking at him the way people look at someone they have decided to trust completely. Ray had written a date in the margin, 7 years ago. The woman's name was written below the photograph. I did not recognize it. Ray had attached a note, first confirmed victim, lost $4.1 million over 18 months. did not press charges. I turned the page. Victor Hale, 52 years old, no fixed employer for the past 11 years. Prior to that, a brief and undistinguished career at 2 financial advisory firms in Chicago, one of which had terminated him following an internal audit, the details of which were sealed. He had reinvented himself as an independent financial consultant and moved to Los Angeles in 2013, where he had spent the next 6 years building a very specific kind of reputation in a very specific kind of social circle. He targeted wealthy women in unhappy or neglected marriages. He was patient, he was charming, he never moved too quickly. He would spend months, sometimes more than a year, simply being present, being attentive, being the kind of man who remembered what you had said 3 conversations ago and asked about it the next time he saw you. And then, when the trust was deep enough and the marriage was distant enough and the loneliness had grown large enough to fill a room, he would begin. Ray had documented 4 confirmed cases before Linda: Los Angeles, San Diego, Miami, and Hartford, Connecticut. In each case, the pattern was identical: a relationship built over many months. Financial documents quietly altered assets, moved through layers of LLCs and shell companies, and then always a disappearance that left the victim holding a tangle of legal and financial damage that took years to unravel. In 2 of the 4 cases, the women had declined to cooperate with investigators because they were too ashamed to describe in open court exactly how thoroughly they had been deceived. Victor Hale had never been convicted of anything. I reached the bottom of the Los Angeles section and turned to the New York pages, and my hand was not entirely steady. The entry point was what Ray had confirmed with Michael, the charity gala at the Pierre Hotel, October 14, 2016. Linda had attended alone because I had been in New Jersey, standing in the rain, watching concrete pour for a project that had run 3 weeks behind schedule. I remembered that night. I remembered calling home from the job site and Linda saying the gala had been perfectly nice and asking if I had eaten dinner. I had told her I had grabbed a sandwich. She had told me to get some sleep. We had said goodnight. 7 years ago. I set the folder down and pressed both palms flat against the desk and stared at the wood grain and tried to locate the feeling that was moving through my chest, because it was not one feeling. It was 4 or 5 stacked on top of each other, so tightly they had fused into something that had no clean name. There was grief in it. That surprised me. Not the sharp grief of sudden loss, but the duller, heavier kind. The grief of understanding that something you thought was real had been constructed, at least in part, on foundations you had not been permitted to inspect. 40 years. The Sunday mornings and the arguments about nothing, and the trip to Yellowstone when Ryan was 16 and got his foot stuck in a mud bank, and Linda laughed so hard she had to sit down on a rock. Had any of that been a performance? Had all of it? I did not know. I was not sure I would ever know. And that uncertainty was its own particular kind of pain. I picked the folder back up. Ray had traced the financial activity with the precision of a man who had spent 2 decades following money through the places it tried to hide. The transfers from our joint accounts I already knew about. But there was more beneath that surface. 14 months ago, a property sale had been recorded in San Bernardino County, California. Our vacation cabin at Lake Arrowhead, a 3-bedroom property Linda and I had purchased 18 years ago as a place to take Ryan during summers, had been sold to a company called Pacific Ridge Holdings, LLC, for a recorded sale price of $1. I read that sentence 3 times. $1. Under California and New York law, Ray had written in his notes a transfer of real property for grossly inadequate consideration, meaning a price so far below market value that it cannot be considered a legitimate sale, can be challenged as a fraudulent conveyance. The property's assessed value at the time of transfer was $940,000. The transfer had been executed using a signature on the deed that Ray had already sent to the same handwriting expert who had reviewed the refinancing documents. My signature, not my signature, Pacific Ridge Holdings, LLC, was incorporated in Nevada, listed a registered agent in Reno, and had no other assets, no employees, and no business activity of any kind. Ray had traced its ownership through 2 layers of nominee directors to a management company in the Cayman Islands that was, as far as the paper trail was concerned, controlled by a man whose name appeared nowhere in any of this, but whose photograph Ray had obtained from a California DMV record and attached to the bottom of the page. Victor Hale. My jaw ached. I realized I had been grinding my teeth for the past 10 minutes. But it was the last document in the folder that made my hand go cold. It was a court form. New York Supreme Court. Article 81 of the Mental Hygiene Law, proceeding for appointment of a guardian. This was the legal mechanism by which a New York court could determine that an individual was no longer capable of managing their personal and financial affairs and could appoint someone else to make those decisions on their behalf. The form had been partially completed. The petitioner's name on the filing was Linda Carter. The respondent, the person alleged to be incapacitated, was William James Carter. The allegations section contained language I read twice because I could not absorb it on the first pass that the respondent exhibited increasing confusion regarding financial matters, that the respondent had, on multiple occasions, been unable to recall recent business decisions, that the respondent's behavior had become erratic and concerning to those closest to him. None of it was true. Not one word of it was true. The form was dated 3 months ago. It had not yet been filed with the court, but it was complete, notarized, and ready. I set it down on the desk with the same careful deliberateness I used when I set down a load-bearing beam, slowly, precisely making sure it was fully placed before I let go. Then I stood up from the desk and walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. The oak tree my son and I had planted was a black shape against the gray September sky. The garden Linda kept along the back fence was still and dark. She was upstairs, asleep presumably, in our bed. In the house I had built 31 years of my life inside, and somewhere in a filing system that I now understood had been constructed with extraordinary patience and care, there was a document that would have made me legally invisible. Not just stripped of my assets, stripped of my voice, stripped of my right to walk into a courtroom and say, "This is mine, and I built it, and I can account for every dollar of it." My hands, I noticed, had curled into fists at my sides. I opened them deliberately, finger by finger, the way you release tension from a cable that has been under too much load. Then I picked up my phone and called Michael. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been waiting. "I finished the folder," I said. "And," his voice was careful, "the Article 81 filing." I kept my voice very quiet so it would not carry through the ceiling above me. "It's dated 3 months ago." Michael exhaled a long, slow breath that carried 3 weeks of tension in it. "I know. Ray flagged it this afternoon." "They were going to make me disappear on paper," I said, "while I was still standing right here." "Yes," Michael said. "William, I need you to listen to me very carefully." His voice dropped lower. "This changes the timeline. We cannot wait as long as I originally thought. We need to move faster than we planned." I looked out at the dark backyard, at the oak tree, at the garden. "Call Ray," I said. "First thing in the morning, tell him I want the full picture by the end of the week. Every account, every document, every name." I pressed one hand against the cold glass of the window, the same gesture I had made 2 days ago at Park Avenue, 19 floors, up watching cabs on the street below. "And Michael," I paused, "tell him I want to know exactly how much time we have before that filing hits a judge's desk." "I'll call him at 7, Michael said. "Good," I said. "Good night." I hung up and stood at the window for another minute, looking at the dark shape of the oak tree in the yard below. Then I turned off the desk lamp and went upstairs to bed. Michael's conference table had never looked so small. Ray had arrived before me, as he always did, and had arranged everything across the surface with the organized precision of a man who understood that clarity was its own form of power. 3 separate stacks of documents, a legal pad with a numbered list, a printed timeline running left to right across 2 sheets of paper taped together at the seam. I stood at the head of the table and looked at it all and felt something cold move through my chest. "Walk me through it," I said. "All of it, start to finish." Ray stood and picked up a pen, not to write, just to point. 4 separate tracks running simultaneously, he said. "They've been building this for at least 2 years. He tapped the first stack. Track 1, financial bleed, structuring transfers under $10,000 to avoid federal currency transaction report requirements. 22 separate transfers over 14 months. Total moved $340,000. Each transaction individually explainable. Together, they constitute a federal crime under the Bank Secrecy Act." I pulled out a chair and sat down. Michael sat across from me, hands folded, saying nothing. "Track 2, Ray continued. Forgery and wire fraud. 2 refinancing documents bearing a signature that is not yours. The proceeds, $2.8 million, were wired through 3 intermediary accounts before landing in a Cayman Island structure that Victor Hale controls. Wire fraud under federal statute carries up to 20 years per count. 20 years! The words landed quietly the way heavy things do when they are set down carefully. "Track 3, Ray said. Fraudulent conveyance. Lake Arrowhead. $940,000 property transferred for $1 to a Nevada LLC that exists solely to receive it. Under New York debtor and creditor law, any transfer made with intent to defraud a creditor or spouse can be voided by a court. The property can be returned to the marital estate. He looked at me. California courts will cooperate on enforcement. And track 4, I said. I already knew. I had not slept thinking about it. The Article 81 filing, Ray said. If Linda's attorneys had submitted that petition and a court had appointed a temporary guardian even for 60 days, Victor would have had legal access to authorized transactions on your behalf. Signed documents, direct assets, all while you contested the proceeding. He set the pen down. By the time you won, and you would have won, eventually the money would have been gone. Michael finally spoke. Total exposure across all 4 tracks, including the company valuation, he said, exceeds $23 million. The number sat in the room like a stone dropped in still water. I watched the ripples move outward and waited for them to settle. They're not ready to file the Article 81 yet, Ray said. My best estimate 4 to 6 weeks before they move. They're waiting for one more refinancing to close. Once that wire clears, they'll have enough liquidity offshore to absorb the legal costs of the proceeding. 4 to 6 weeks. I looked at the timeline spread across the table. 2 years of careful, patient construction. Every piece fitted to the next. I had built enough structures in my life to recognize genuine craftsmanship, even when what had been crafted was designed to destroy me. Here's what we're not going to do, I said. Both men looked at me. We're not going to call the police this afternoon. We're not going to file anything. We're not going to make a single move that tells them we know. I pressed both palms flat on the table. I want them to keep building. I want Ryan to keep signing whatever Victor puts in front of him. I want every transaction documented and time-stamped and witnessed. I paused. The deeper they dig, the less ground they have to stand on when this comes apart. Michael leaned forward. William, the risk. I know the risk, I said, but I've been in this business long enough to know that you don't stop a pour halfway through. You wait until the structure is fully committed, then you test the load. Michael looked at Ray. Ray gave one small, deliberate nod. There is one more resource we haven't discussed, Ray said carefully. I made a preliminary inquiry yesterday. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit in Manhattan has an open investigation. Victor Hale is already in their system. They may be very interested in what we have. The room felt different after he said that. Larger somehow. Set up the meeting, I said. My phone buzzed on the table. Linda. Dinner at 7, I'm making the lamb. I picked it up. Typed back, sounds perfect. I'll be home by 6:30. I set the phone face down and looked at Ray. Now, I said, tell me exactly how the FBI connection works. The hardest part was not the lying. The hardest part was how easy the lying had become. By the second week of October, I had developed a rhythm that would have been impressive under other circumstances. Mornings with Linda over coffee, her talking me, listening both of us, performing a version of our marriage that had apparently been fictional for longer than I wanted to calculate. Afternoons at the office where I began casually mentioning to Ryan and 2 senior directors that I was seriously considering stepping back at 62. Evenings at Park Avenue where Ray updated me on whatever Ryan had signed that day. And Ryan was signing things. 3 more documents this week, Ray told me on a Thursday evening, sliding his laptop across the table. 2 property transfer authorizations and 1 amendment to a business loan. Ryan's signature on all 3. He's not reading them carefully, or if he is, he's choosing not to ask questions. Because Victor told him not to, I said. Because Victor told him it was almost over, Ray said. That's the phrase he keeps using in the texts, almost over. Ryan needs to believe that. I looked at the scanned documents on Ray's screen. My son's handwriting on the signature lines, the same handwriting I had watched form over decades from crayon letters on construction paper to his name on a college diploma I still had framed in my office. Each signature was clean and unhesitating. That unhesitating quality broke something small in my chest every time I saw it. Not because Ryan was careless, because he was desperate enough to trust someone who had built that desperation deliberately. On a Saturday morning, I played golf with James Whitfield at the Greenwich Country Club. James was 67, a retired cardiologist who had been my closest friend for 20 years, the kind of man who had attended every significant event of my adult life, and never once asked for anything in return except occasional company on a golf course. He watched me miss a straightforward putt on the 4th green and said nothing. Watched me pull my drive left on the 5th tee and said nothing. On the sixth fairway, while I was lining up an approach shot I had no real intention of making, he said, "William, you haven't looked at a single hole today. You've been looking through them." I lowered the club. "I'm fine, James," I said. "You've said that before," he replied, falling into step beside me as we walked toward the green. His voice was unhurried, the voice of a man who had delivered difficult news for 30 years and understood the value of not rushing. "You weren't fine then either. You don't have to tell me what it is, but don't carry it alone too long. It changes the way a man stands." I looked at him, this man who had sat beside me at my father's funeral, who had driven Linda and me to the hospital the night Ryan broke his arm at age 9, who had never once in 20 years overstepped by a single inch. "I'll tell you," I said, "when I can, not yet." He nodded, once picked up his bag, and did not mention it again. That evening I sat alone in my study after Linda went to bed, looking at the photograph of Sophie on the shelf above my desk. Her graduation picture, both arms raised, that enormous, uncomplicated joy on her face. I thought about what it meant that I had not called her in 3 weeks. Sophie called me every Sunday, and I had let 2 of those calls go to voicemail and returned them with texts. She had responded each time with a single line that somehow understood exactly what it needed to say without knowing anything. "Thinking of you, Uncle William. Whenever you're ready." My phone buzzed. "Ray. Audio from FBI contact is ready. Come in tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Prepare yourself." I read the message twice, set the phone face down on the desk. Prepare yourself. 2 words I had used on job sites when a structural report came back worse than anyone had expected. 2 words that meant what comes next will require everything you have. I looked at Sophie's photograph one more time. Then I turned off the lamp. Before I tell you what was on that recording, the 2 words that changed everything I thought I knew about 40 years of marriage, type "ready" in the comments right now, so I know you're still here with me. Just a reminder, this story contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Names, places, and certain details may not reflect any specific situation. If this kind of content is not for you, it is completely okay to step away now. Ray's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Lexington Avenue, smaller and less polished than Michael's, with bookshelves that held actual case files and a window that looked out at a water tower on the roof of the building next door. He was standing when I arrived, not pacing, just standing near his desk, hands in his pockets, with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting and has used the waiting time to prepare himself for something he did not look forward to delivering. Michael was already seated in the corner chair. Neither of them spoke when I walked in. 7 on the dot, I said, setting my coat over the back of a chair. "Where is it?" Ray reached across the desk and pressed play on a small speaker I had not noticed until that moment. The room filled with the ambient sound of an apartment, the soft hum of a refrigerator, the faint traffic noise of Upper East Side Manhattan filtering through glass. Then Victor's voice, low and unhurried, the voice of a man completely at ease in the space he was occupying. "The Article 81 filing is almost ready," Victor said. "Once the court appoints a temporary guardian, William loses all decision-making authority. Everything flows through the guardian, which means everything flows through us." Linda's voice came next, familiar, the voice I had heard across 37,000 mornings. "How long after the appointment before we can move on the company's sale?" 90 days minimum, Victor said. "New York procedure, but account access comes much sooner. We'll have what we need before the sale closes." The sound of ice shifting in a glass. "The Cayman transfers," Linda said. "They're ready, structured and waiting," Victor said. "The moment the sale wire hits, we move. 48 hours and it's untouchable." A pause, longer than the others. Then Victor's voice dropped slightly. "There's one remaining variable." "Ryan," Linda said. "Ryan," Victor confirmed. "Every forged document has his signature. Every unauthorized transfer was processed under his authorization codes. When this unravels, and it will unravel eventually, these things always do, he will be the one sitting across from a federal prosecutor trying to explain decisions he made over 18 months. The refrigerator hummed. Traffic moved 14 floors below on Lexington Avenue. My hands, I noticed, were gripping the armrests of my chair hard enough that the leather creaked. "He's my son," Linda said. Her voice did not break when she said it. It did not waver. It was the same voice she used to discuss catering menus and charitable donations, and whether the living room needed repainting. "I know," Victor said. 4 seconds of silence on the recording. I counted them. "But if I have to sacrifice one person," Linda said, "for our freedom." She paused. So be it. Ray reached over and stopped the recording. The office felt like it had lost all its air. Michael was looking at the window. Ray was looking at me. I was looking at the speaker on the desk. A small black rectangle, nothing remarkable about it, just a device that had delivered the most precise description of 40 years of my life I had ever received. My throat had closed around something that was trying to become a sound, and I was not going to let it. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for 3 seconds hard, until the feeling receded enough to breathe around. So be it. I had heard Linda say my father's eulogy when I was too destroyed to speak. I had heard her whisper Ryan's name the night he was born, her voice shaking with something too large for language. I had heard her laugh, really laugh, the unguarded kind maybe 4 times in 40 years, and each time it had felt like a gift. So be it. 2 words, 8 letters. The complete and final answer to a question I had not known I was asking. I stood up from the chair because sitting had become impossible, walked to the window, pressed my forehead against the cold glass, and stayed there for a moment, feeling the temperature against my skin, using it as an anchor. William. Ray's voice was careful and quiet, the voice he used when he was giving someone space to land. I'm here, I said. My voice came back rougher than I expected. I cleared my throat. I'm here. I turned around. Both men were watching me with the expression of people who understood. They were witnessing something private and were trying to take up as little space as possible. My son, I said, I want Ryan out of this. Not partially, not conditionally. I looked at Ray. Whatever cooperation looks like, whatever it costs, whatever I have to arrange, Ryan does not go to prison for what she decided. My voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I did not try to smooth it over. She made that choice. He didn't. William, Michael started. I know what he signed, I said. The crack in my voice had sealed itself back up, replaced by something harder and colder and more useful. I know exactly what he did. I also know he did it because a professional predator identified his worst moment and walked through it. Those are not the same thing. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. Get me in front of the FBI this week and find Ryan a criminal defense attorney, someone Michael doesn't use, no conflict of interest. The best white-collar defense lawyer in this city. Ray was already writing. One more thing, I said at the door. Both men looked up. The recording, I said. How was it obtained? Title III warrant, Ray said. Federal Wiretap Authority. The FBI applied for judicial authorization 14 months ago as part of an existing investigation into Victor Hale's financial activities. Everything on that recording was collected, legally reviewed by a federal judge, and logged as evidence. He paused. Nothing we just heard can be challenged on procedural grounds. It will stand in any court in this country. I nodded once. Good, I said. And I walked out into the hallway and found the nearest men's room and stood over the sink with the cold water running over my wrists for 90 seconds, staring at my own reflection before I straightened my tie and went back to work. 26 Federal Plaza is a 41-story granite building in Lower Manhattan that looks exactly like what it is. A place where the federal government conducts serious business without any interest in making you feel comfortable about it. Michael and I rode the elevator to the 23rd floor without speaking. The hallway smelled like recycled air and carpet cleaner. A young agent met us at the security door, checked our identification twice, and led us to a conference room with no windows and 4 chairs around a table that had seen better decades. Agent Diana Reeves was already inside. She was 44, compact with close-cropped hair, and the kind of direct eye contact that told you immediately she had not scheduled this meeting to make friends. She stood and shook hands, firm, brief, and gestured to the chairs across from her. Mr. Carter, she said, I've been waiting 18 months to have this conversation. Then let's not waste each other's time, I said. She almost smiled. Almost. Reeves opened a folder and turned it to face me. Victor Hale's photograph on top. Below it, a map of the United States with 4 cities marked in red: Los Angeles, San Diego, Miami, Hartford. 4 confirmed victims before your family, she said. Total documented losses exceeding $43 million. 2 of those families declined to cooperate with prosecution. 1 was too financially destroyed to sustain a legal fight. 1 is still pending. She tapped the folder. We have a strong circumstantial case. What we don't have is someone on the inside of an active operation who can testify to the current scheme in real time. Which is where I come in, I said. Which is where you come in, she confirmed. We need the operation to continue for approximately 3 more weeks. We need Ryan Carter to keep signing documents under the assumption that nothing has changed. We need Victor Hale to believe he is 4 weeks away from the finish line. She looked at me steadily. Can you maintain that? I've maintained it for 6 weeks already, I said. Reeves nodded. Then here is what the FBI can offer in return. Full federal backing on asset recovery. Coordination with New York Supreme Court on the civil proceedings. And, she paused, regarding your son. My back straightened involuntarily. Ryan Carter has significant criminal exposure, she said, and her voice was direct without being cruel. The signatures alone constitute multiple counts of wire fraud and forgery. Under normal circumstances, we would be building a parallel case against him. She folded her hands. However, a defendant who comes to us voluntarily through counsel before charges are filed, who provides complete and truthful cooperation, is in a categorically different position. A proffer agreement followed by full cooperation can reduce his exposure dramatically, in some cases to probation and mandatory counseling. A proffer agreement was a formal arrangement under federal law, a written agreement allowing a defendant to share information with prosecutors under limited immunity, meaning what they said in those sessions generally could not be used directly against them. It was the first step toward a formal cooperation agreement. It was in plain terms the door Ray had described. Ryan has to come to you himself, I said, through his own attorney. Correct, Reeves said. We cannot approach him, and Mr. Carter Michael Grant cannot represent him. Representing both of you creates a conflict of interest that would compromise the entire cooperation. I've already arranged separate counsel, I said. Thomas Bray. He'll contact your office this week. For the first time, something shifted in Reeves's expression. Not surprise exactly, but the recalibration of someone who had underestimated the person sitting across from her. You came prepared, she said. I build things for a living, I said. I don't start without a complete set of plans. We spent another 40 minutes working through the operational details, what documentation Ray would continue to collect, how the FBI would position agents for the final meeting, the exact sequence of events that would need to unfold in the conference room at Carter Construction. When it was done, Reeves stood and shook my hand again. 3 weeks, Mr. Carter, she said. Then it's over. Outside on Broadway, the October air hit my face like cold water. Michael turned up his collar against the wind. How are you holding up? He asked. I thought about the right answer, decided on the honest one. Call Sophie, I said. Tell her I need to see her and James this Friday, somewhere quiet. I started walking. I've been carrying this alone long enough. The restaurant was called Bellamy's, a small Italian place on Greenwich Avenue that had 12 tables and an owner who had been making the same 4 pasta dishes since 1991 and saw no reason to change any of them. Sophie had chosen it. She always chose places like this, quiet, unpretentious, the kind of room where the lighting was warm enough that you could say difficult things without feeling exposed. She had been doing that since she was 19 years old and figured out that her uncle sometimes needed to be taken care of without being told he was being taken care of. She was already there when I arrived, sitting across from James Whitfield in the corner booth, her dark hair pulled back, her hands wrapped around a glass of water. She stood the moment she saw me come through the door. Not a quick, polite stand, but all the way up, crossing the room in 3 steps and wrapping both arms around me with the kind of force that 28-year-olds deploy when they have been worried about someone for 3 weeks and have been pretending not to be. Uncle William, she said into my shoulder. I held on for a moment longer than I normally would have. Then I stepped back and looked at her face, those direct brown eyes that had always reminded me of my sister at the same age, and said, Thank you for coming. You said it was important, she said. You've sent me to voicemail twice in 3 weeks. Of course I came. Whitfield raised his water glass across the table. William, James, I sat down. I need to tell you both something, all of it, from the beginning. So I did. I started with JFK and the ring in my pocket. I told them about Michael's call and the camera and Ryan's voice saying we have plenty of time. I told them about the hotel on West 35th Street and the 3 days I spent 12 blocks from my own home. I told them about Ray and the structuring transfers and the forged signatures and Lake Arrowhead sold for $1. I told them about the Article 81 filing and Victor Hale's 4 previous victims and the FBI meeting on the 23rd floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. And then I told them about the recording, Sophie had been listening without moving her water glass, untouched, her eyes fixed on my face with an intensity that reminded me of the way she had listened to me explain construction documents when she was 12 years old and had decided she wanted to understand how buildings worked. She had always listened like that, completely without reservation, as if whatever you were saying was the most important thing currently happening in the world. When I got to "so be it," her eyes filled. She did not blink them back. She let them come, pressing her lips together hard, her jaw tight, her hands flat on the table in front of her. One tear tracked down her left cheek, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand in a quick, almost angry gesture, as if she resented the tear for arriving before she was ready for it. 5 weeks, she said. Her voice was thicker than usual. You've been carrying this for 5 weeks. 6 now, I said. And you went home every night. She shook her head slowly. You sat at dinner with her, and you knew. I had to, I said. No. Sophie looked at me with an expression I recognized, the one she got when she had decided something was true and intended to say it regardless of whether it was comfortable. You chose to, because you don't walk away from things half-finished. You never have. Her voice caught slightly. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard, and I hate that you had to do it alone. Whitfield reached across and put his hand over mine on the table. His palm was warm and dry and steady in the way that 67-year-old hands are steady, not because nothing has shaken them, but because everything has shaken them, and they have learned to hold anyway. You're allowed to be tired, William, he said quietly. You're allowed to sit in this booth and eat pasta and not be the strongest person in the room for 1 hour. I laughed, a short, rough sound that surprised me when it came out. I ordered the pappardelle, I said. I'll do my best. Sophie smiled at that, a watery, genuine smile, and then she said, There's something I need to tell you. The smile faded as she said it. She straightened slightly the way people do when they are bracing themselves. 8 weeks ago, she said, Ryan called me, late after 11. He sounded off, frightened maybe, or exhausted. I couldn't tell which. She turned her water glass slowly in her hands. He said he'd made a mistake, a serious one. I asked him what kind, and he said, She paused, recalling the exact words, the kind where you don't find out the full price until it's too late to pay a different way. My chest contracted. I thought he meant work, Sophie said. Her voice dropped. A deal gone wrong, something like that. I told him mistakes were fixable and to call me in the morning, and he said okay, and hung up. She looked at me directly. He never called in the morning. I should have pushed harder. I'm sorry, Uncle William. I'm so sorry I didn't push harder. Sophie. I waited until she met my eyes. You didn't know. Ryan didn't give you enough to know. I leaned forward slightly. But what you just told me, it means something important. It means that somewhere in the middle of all of this, he wanted to stop. He just couldn't find the door. Can he still find it? She asked. Thomas Bray is going to make sure of it, I said. Whitfield refilled my water glass from the pitcher on the table, a small, unhurried gesture that somehow made me feel steadier than anything else that had happened in 6 weeks. Eat your pappardelle, he said. The rest will still be there in an hour. My phone buzzed on the table. Linda, home late tonight, don't wait up. I looked at the message, set the phone face down. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from a number I recognized as Linda's second phone, the one Ray had flagged 3 weeks ago. A message to Victor. He agreed to the meeting. Conference room. Next week. I read it twice. The monitoring protocol had already flagged it to Ray's system the moment it was sent. Then I looked up at Sophie and Whitfield across the candlelit table at Bellamy's restaurant on Greenwich Avenue, and I said, Tell the waiter I'll have the pappardelle, and get James whatever he wants. He's been patient enough. Sunday arrived the way the last day of anything arrives, quietly, without announcement, looking exactly like every other day that had come before it. I woke at 5:30 without an alarm, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that I lay there for a full 20 minutes instead of getting up, staring at the ceiling in the gray pre-dawn light, listening to Linda breathe beside me, slow and even. The same rhythm she had kept for 40 years in this bed, in this room, in this house that we had chosen together from a listing sheet on a Tuesday afternoon in 1992. Because she had liked the oak tree in the front yard, and I had liked the basement, which was large enough to serve as a proper workshop. I had never built anything in that workshop. I was always too busy building other things. By 7, I was downstairs. The kitchen filled slowly with the smell of coffee, and then 20 minutes later, the smell of butter in a pan, because Linda came down in her blue robe and made pancakes the way she had made them every Sunday for as long as I could remember. Edges slightly crisp, centers, soft maple syrup, warmed in a small pot on the back burner. She set a plate in front of me and poured my coffee without being asked, and sat across the table and said, "You look like you slept well." "I did," I said. She smiled and reached for the syrup and told me about a fundraising committee meeting she had on Wednesday, and I listened and asked the right questions and ate every bite of the pancakes because they were, as they had always been, exactly right. Ryan arrived at noon. He came through the back door calling out, "I brought bagels," and dropped a white paper bag on the counter and shook my hand and kissed Linda on the cheek. And the three of us sat around the kitchen table and ate lunch the way we had eaten 1,000 lunches in that kitchen, passing things back and forth, talking over each other, the kind of comfortable disorder that takes decades to build. Ryan was telling us about the Jersey City project square footage zoning complications, a structural engineer he liked, and I was listening and nodding and watching my son's hands move the way they always did when he talked about buildings animated and specific his father's hands on his father's subject. And something behind my sternum ached with a dullness that I had learned by now to simply breathe around. Then Ryan looked up from his plate and found me watching him. Something moved across his face, a quick internal weather change there, and gone. He opened his mouth, drew breath. And then he said, "Dad, I need to..." Linda stood up to refill the water pitcher. The sound of the faucet running filled the kitchen for 4 seconds. Ryan's eyes cut to his mother's back and then back to me, and whatever he had been about to say retracted itself like a hand pulled back from a hot surface. "Never mind," he said. "It's nothing. Ryan." I kept my voice low and level, the voice I used when I needed someone to hear me clearly. "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." He held my gaze for a long moment, long enough that I could see the effort it was costing him to hold it, and then he nodded once and looked back down at his plate. Linda returned with the water pitcher cheerful and unhurried, and refilled everyone's glass, and the conversation resumed, as if it had never paused. I spent the afternoon alone in my study while Linda attended a garden club meeting down the street. I called Michael at 2 o'clock for the final check. Every piece was confirmed. Ray had completed his documentation. Agent Reeves had her team in position for Monday morning. Thomas Bray had met with Ryan on Thursday. Ryan had listened to everything Bray had said and had not yet given an answer, which Bray told me was normal and which I had spent 3 days trying not to think about too carefully. "He'll choose right," Michael said. "I believe that." "I know you do," I said. "I'm trying to." After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a while, looking at the ring box Michael had couriered over that morning, now sitting on the corner of my blotter, where I could see it without having to look for it. Black velvet, $80,000 of white gold inside. I had bought it to celebrate something. Tomorrow, I would find out what it was actually for. Linda came home at 4:30, and we watched the evening news together on the sofa, her legs tucked under her, her shoulder 3 inches from mine, the same configuration we had maintained on that sofa for 31 years. At one point, she laughed at something the weatherman said, a real laugh, genuine and unguarded, and I looked at her profile in the blue light of the television screen and felt something in my chest that I would not have been able to name accurately, even if someone had asked me directly. Not love, not anymore, or not the same kind, but something adjacent to grief and also adjacent to gratitude and also adjacent to the particular exhaustion of a man who has been standing upright through something very heavy for a very long time, and can see finally that tomorrow it will be over. I let her laugh without saying anything. I did not reach for her hand. At 10 o'clock, Ryan texted me. 4 words. "Bray gets my answer tomorrow." I read it in the upstairs hallway, standing outside my own bedroom door. My chest did something complicated and painful and hopeful all at once. 3 feelings arriving simultaneously and colliding in a way that made me close my eyes for a moment and press one hand flat against the wall. Then I typed back 2 words. "I know, son." I went to bed. Linda was already reading. She looked up and smiled and said goodnight and turned back to her book, and I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling of the room I had slept in for 31 years, and listened to the house settle around me, the particular creaks and sighs of a structure that knew it was being asked to hold one last thing before morning. At 6:15, my phone lit up on the nightstand. Michael. I picked it up before it could ring twice. "Everyone is confirmed," he said. "Reeves is in position by 8:45. Ray has everything loaded and ready." A pause. "William, today is the day." I looked at the dark ceiling. Outside, Greenwich was beginning its slow translation from night into morning, the sky shifting from black to the particular deep blue that comes just before dawn breaks properly. "I'll be there at 8, I said. Before I show you what appeared on that screen, the moment Victor, Linda, and Ryan realized the game was already over, comment justice right now. I want to know exactly how many of you have stayed with William this far. Quick note, this story blends fiction with deeply human lessons. Details including names and settings are not tied to any specific person or place. If you prefer to step away here, I completely understand, but what comes next is something you will not want to miss. I had signed my first contract in that conference room 31 years ago. A parking structure in the Bronx, $82,000. I had worn the navy suit I bought specifically for the occasion, my first real suit, purchased on credit from a men's shop on Madison Avenue by a 29-year-old who had no business buying suits on credit and did it anyway because he needed to look like the kind of man who built things. I remembered sitting at the head of that walnut table with the pen in my hand and thinking, this is what the rest of your life looks like. I put on that same suit this morning. It still fit, slightly looser at the shoulders than it had been 31 years ago, which my tailor had told me was simply what happened to men. Over time, the shoulders went first, then everything else followed at its own pace. But it fit. And when I looked at myself in the mirror at 6:45 this morning, I thought, yes, this is the right thing to wear today. I arrived at Carter Construction at 8:03. The lobby was already moving delivery people, the morning security shift changed, 2 architects from the 4th floor, waiting for the elevator with coffee cups and rolled drawings. The receptionist behind the desk, a young woman named Claire who had worked the morning shift for 3 years, looked up and said, "Good morning, Mr. Carter," with the particular warmth of someone who was genuinely glad to see you. And I said, "Good morning, Claire," and meant it more than she knew. The elevator opened on the 28th floor at 8:11. Ray was already in the conference room laptop, opened 2 screens running the main presentation, loaded and ready the secondary backup on a separate drive in case anything failed. He looked up when I walked in and gave me the small, deliberate nod that meant everything is in place, and I nodded back and did not need to say anything. Michael arrived at 8:20. He set his briefcase on the table, straightened his cuffs, and looked at me across the length of the walnut table, the same way he had looked at me across 2 decades of difficult rooms. "Ready?" he said. "I've been ready since JFK," I said. At 8:45, 2 people I had introduced to the receptionist as compliance consultants from an outside firm stepped out of the elevator and into the conference room. Agent Diana Reeves wore a charcoal blazer and carried a leather folder. The man beside her, Agent Torres, was younger and broader and said nothing, which appeared to be his preferred mode of operation. They took chairs along the left wall, close enough to the door to matter far enough from the table to look like observers. I stood at the window and watched 7th Avenue 28 floors below and breathed. At 9:15, the elevator opened again. Linda stepped out first. She was wearing the blue cashmere sweater, the one I had given her for our 35th anniversary chosen, because she had mentioned once in passing that she looked good in that particular shade, and I had filed it away for 8 months until the right occasion. She was carrying a leather portfolio I did not recognize. Her hair was done. She looked as she always did when she was about to accomplish something she had planned, carefully composed and unhurried and faintly pleased with herself. She saw me at the window and smiled. "Good morning, darling," she said, and her voice was warm and familiar, and exactly as it had always been, and something in my jaw tightened so hard that I tasted metal. "Good morning," I said. Ryan came through the door 2 steps behind her. He was in a dark blazer, his hair combed back, and he looked tired in a way that good clothes could not entirely conceal. A tiredness that lived behind the eyes, and had been there, I now understood, for longer than 3 years. He shook my hand. His grip was firm, and his palm was slightly damp, and he held my gaze for exactly 1 second before he looked away at the table. Victor Hale came last. He was dressed in a gray suit that fit him well, a pocket square the color of old money cufflinks that caught the light when he moved. He crossed the room with the ease of a man arriving somewhere he had already decided he owned, and he extended his hand to me, and I shook it, and his grip was dry and confident and told me absolutely nothing about what was happening inside him. "William," he said as if we were colleagues. "Good to finally formalize things." "It is," I said. "Have a seat." Linda set her portfolio on the table and opened it and took out a document that I recognized as the executive authority transfer the paper that would have signed hand operational control of Carter Construction to Ryan, who would then be positioned under Victor's guidance to authorize the company's sale. She placed it in front of me and smoothed it once with her palm and pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the first page. "It's straightforward," she said. "Just the transfer of authority. Everything else follows from here. I looked at the document, I looked at the signature line, I looked at my wife's hand still resting lightly on the edge of the page, the hand I had held at an altar in June of 1983, the hand I had held in a hospital waiting room when Ryan was sick at age 4, and we did not know yet how sick the hand I had held on a beach in Maine the summer we decided we were happy and did not examine that decision too closely. I looked at Ray. He looked back at me. I gave one small nod. Ray reached beneath the table and pressed a key on the laptop. The 85-inch screen on the north wall of the conference room came to life. The room went very still. The first image that appeared was not a video. It was not a financial record. It was not a photograph of Linda and Victor together, or a spreadsheet of transferred funds, or a copy of the Article 81 petition with Linda's signature at the bottom. It was a single photograph, dated October 14, 2016, the Pierre Hotel Manhattan, a charity gala on the 42nd floor, crystal and candlelight, and the particular energy of a room full of people who had decided they were important. Linda was in the photograph. She was smiling that particular smile, the real one, the unguarded one I had seen maybe a dozen times in 40 years. Victor's hand was on the small of her back, and his head was inclined slightly toward hers, and they were standing together the way people stand when they have already made several decisions about each other. I was in New Jersey that night, standing in the rain on a job site watching concrete pour for a building that would take 2 more years to finish. The photograph stayed on the screen. Nobody in the room said a word. I watched Linda's face. She had gone the color of old paper, not pale exactly, but drained as if something that had been maintaining the surface tension of her expression had quietly given way. Her hand was still on the document in front of her. It was no longer still. Victor's eyes had moved from the screen to me. His expression had not changed exactly, but something behind it had shifted the way the light shifts in a room when a cloud passes over the sun. Not panic, not yet. Something more preliminary than panic. The first recognition that the ground he had been standing on was not in fact solid. Ryan was staring at the screen. His mouth had opened slightly. He was reading the date in the corner of the photograph. I could see his eyes move to it and stay there, and I watched him do the arithmetic that I had done, standing at a column in Terminal 4 at JFK, the arithmetic that started with 7 years ago and ended somewhere that had no clean name. The room held its breath. And then Ray reached forward and pressed the key again, and the second image appeared. The second image was a spreadsheet. 22 rows, 2 columns. Dates and dollar amounts going back 14 months, each transfer landing just below $10,000, with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this before and understood exactly where the legal lines were drawn. Then the third image, the Lake Arrowhead deed, sale price $1, buyer Pacific Ridge, holdings LLC. The signature on the seller's line read William J. Carter in handwriting that was close enough to mine to fool a casual reader and different enough to convict someone in a federal courtroom. Ryan leaned forward in his chair. His jaw had gone rigid. The fourth image, the Article 81 petition. Linda's signature at the bottom, notarized dated 3 months ago. The allegation section was large enough to read from across the table. The respondent exhibits increasing confusion regarding financial matters. Linda made a sound small and voluntary, the sound of someone who has just stepped on something they did not see coming. The fifth image, Ryan's signatures, 6 documents, side by side with the originals Victor had provided him. The differences when you knew to look were invisible. That was the problem. Ryan's face had gone the color of old concrete. Then the audio began. Victor's voice first low and unhurried, filling the conference room through Ray's speakers with the same ease it had filled an Upper East Side apartment 14 months ago, under an active federal wiretap warrant. Once the court appoints a temporary guardian, William loses all decision-making authority. Linda's voice next. Familiar. The voice from 37,000 mornings. How long before we can move on the company sale, the Cayman transfers, the 90 days, the wire, and then Victor Ryan stays. Every forged document has his signature. He'll spend years explaining that to a federal prosecutor. Ryan's hands, which had been flat on the table in front of him, curled into fists so tight his knuckles went white. His breath had become audible, short and rapid, pulling through his nose like a man who has been running and has only just stopped. 4 seconds of silence on the recording. Then Linda's voice. He's my son. I know. But if I have to sacrifice one person for our freedom, a pause, so be it. Ryan shoved back from the table so hard his chair scraped against the floor and shrieked. He stood up with both hands pressed flat on the walnut surface, his whole frame shaking. And he looked at his mother with an expression I had never seen on my son's face in 32 years. Not anger something raw and more fundamental than anger something that lived in the part of a person that forms before language does. "You are going to leave me here?" he said. His voice broke on the last word, and he did not try to fix it. "Mom, you are going to walk out of the country and leave me here to explain this to federal prosecutors." Linda opened her mouth. "Ryan, it's not... Were you..." His voice cracked completely, tears hitting his eyes fast and hard, and he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, the way people do when they're trying to hold something in that is determined to come out anyway. "Just answer me. Were you going to leave me?" Linda looked at Victor. It was the worst thing she could have done. Victor looked back at her with the flat, assessing expression of a man calculating how much damage was already done and how little of it he intended to absorb. "Every signature on every document," he said, his voice perfectly level, "belongs to your son. Every single one." Ryan let out a sound that was not quite a word, something between a laugh and a sob, sharp and broken, and turned away from both of them, toward the window, his shoulders heaving, one hand pressed against the glass. Agent Reeves stood up. "Mr. Hale," she said, "my name is Special Agent Diana Reeves. You have the right to remain silent." Victor did not resist. He stood when Reeves asked him to stand, placed his hands behind his back when Agent Torres moved behind him, and said nothing when the cuffs clicked into place. He looked in that moment like a man who had run this particular calculation and arrived at the conclusion that composure was still his best available asset. Then he looked at Linda. "You should have chosen a better family," he said. His voice was perfectly level, no anger, no panic, just the flat final assessment of a man closing a file. One with less history, less documentation. He paused. "And a less competent attorney." Linda's face crumpled. Not slowly all at once like a structure that had been under too much load for too long, and finally gave way at every point simultaneously. Her mouth opened and something came out that was not quite a word and not quite a sob, but lived in the territory between the two, and she pressed both hands over her face and her shoulders shook, and for a moment she looked like someone I might have recognized. I had sat in this chair for 31 years of decisions. I stood up. I walked to the small cabinet beneath the credenza on the east wall, the one that had held the same bottle of scotch for client signings since 2004. And I opened the lower drawer, where Michael had placed the black velvet box that morning, and I took it out and I carried it back to the table. I set it down in front of Linda. She lowered her hands from her face. Her eyes were red and wet, and she looked at the box without comprehension for a moment. The way you look at something that belongs to a different version of your life. "I bought this 3 months ago," I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. $80,000. I had it made specifically round-cut white gold classic setting. I was going to give it to you at dinner the night I came home from Los Angeles. I paused. "To celebrate 40 years. Linda stared at the box. A tear tracked down her left cheek and dropped onto the table. "I think we both know," I said quietly, "that it doesn't belong here anymore." She did not reach for it. She did not speak. She looked at the box, and then she looked at me, really looked at me the way she had not looked at me in longer than I could accurately calculate, and whatever she saw in my face made her press her lips together and look away. I left the box on the table. Ryan had turned away from the window. He was standing with his arms at his sides, his eyes dry now, but raw around the edges, watching me with an expression that I had to look at twice before I understood what it was. Not guilt he had been wearing. Guilt for months, I could see that clearly now. This was something else. Something that a 32-year-old man wore on his face when he had just watched his father do something that cost him something real. "Dad," he said, one word. The way he had said it at age 4 when he fell off his bicycle, and at age 9 when he was frightened in a hospital bed, and at age 16 when he made a mistake he thought was unforgivable, and I had told him it was not. "Not here," I said. "Not now." I held his gaze. "But I promise you we will talk, you and me, soon." His jaw worked. His eyes went bright and dangerous, with something he was keeping behind his teeth by sheer force of will. He nodded once hard, the nod of a man making a commitment, and looked at the floor. Michael appeared at my elbow. "The court filings start this afternoon," he said quietly. "Asset freeze motion goes in at 2 o'clock. Ray has everything time-stamped and ready." I looked around the room one final time. The walnut table where I had signed my first contract 31 years ago. The window overlooking 7th Avenue. The screen on the north wall still lit, still displaying the last image in the sequence that came in account confirmation, waiting to receive money that was never going to arrive. Victor was being guided toward the door by Torres. Linda had not moved from her chair. The black velvet box sat on the table between us, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. "Good," I said to Michael. "Let's finish this." The hallway outside the conference room was quieter than it had any right to be. Victor was gone. Torres had taken him down the service elevator to avoid the lobby, which was standard procedure, and which I had not needed to ask about, because Reeves had handled it without being asked. Linda was still inside with her attorney, who had arrived 11 minutes after Reeves made her first call, looking like a man who had received very bad news on a Monday morning and was trying to process it at a professional pace. I stood at the window at the end of the hallway and looked out at 7th Avenue and breathed. Michael found me there 2 minutes later. "Ray is packaging everything for the court filing," he said. "Asset freeze motion goes to the commercial division clerk at 2. We should have a temporary restraining order on the accounts by end of business today." "Good," I said. "The Lake Arrowhead reversal will take longer. California courts need to be served separately. But the fraudulent conveyance ruling from New York is the foundation. Once that's in place, the California action follows." He paused. "William, you should know Linda's attorney is already talking about cooperation. She wants to negotiate." "That's between her and the prosecutors," I said. "I don't need anything from her." Michael nodded. He understood. Thomas Bray appeared at the far end of the hallway, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and the unhurried walk of someone who had been in difficult hallways before and found them manageable. He had spent 22 years defending white-collar cases in federal court in Manhattan, and when he shook my hand outside the conference room door, his grip was brief, and his eyes were already somewhere else, already on the problem, already calculating. "Your son is ready to talk," he said. My chest did something complicated. "How is he scared?" Bray said directly. "But clear. He understands what he's facing, and he understands what cooperation means." He looked at me steadily. "He asked me one question before he agreed to anything." "What did he ask?" "He asked if you arranged for me to be here." The hallway felt very quiet for a moment. "What did you tell him?" I said. "The truth," Bray said. Then he turned and went back through the door. I waited. 14 minutes later, Ryan came out. He stopped when he saw me, just stopped in the middle of the hallway, his hands at his sides, his jacket slightly rumpled from the morning, his eyes carrying the particular rawness of someone who has been through something in a small room and has not yet had time to reassemble himself around it. He walked toward me, stopped 2 feet away. "Dad?" His voice was rough and low. "I don't—" He stopped, pressed his lips together hard. His jaw was working against something that very badly wanted to come out. "I don't know how to start." "Then don't start," I said. "Not here, not with an explanation." I looked at my son, this man I had watched become himself over 32 years imperfectly and expensively, and with the particular stubbornness that I recognized because I had watched it develop in the mirror for 60. "You found the door, Ryan. That's what matters right now." His eyes went bright and wet, and he blinked hard once, twice, and then he exhaled a long breath that seemed to come from somewhere below his sternum, the kind of breath that carries something with it when it leaves. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'm so sorry." "I know," I said. "I know you are." I put my hand on his shoulder briefly firmly, the way I had when he was 9 years old, and frightened, and needed to know that the ground was still solid, and then I let go. We stood side by side at the window for a moment, looking out at 7th Avenue together. Manhattan moved below us, indifferent and continuous the way it always did. "Go with Bray," I said finally. "Do exactly what he tells you. Answer every question honestly." I paused. "And Ryan call me tonight." He nodded. Once, hard. Then he walked back down the hallway, and I watched him go, and I picked up my phone and called no one and simply stood at that window for another minute, listening to the city, before I pressed the elevator button and went downstairs and walked out into the December cold and turned my collar up and started toward the coffee shop on the corner. I had built half the skyline visible from where I stood. Today I just needed a cup of coffee, so I got one. The first morning I sat alone in the office on the 28th floor, I made coffee from the machine in the corner that nobody ever used because everyone preferred the place downstairs, and I drank it standing at the window watching 7th Avenue wake up, and I thought, this is what the rest of your life looks like. The same thought I had 31 years ago at the same table with a pen in my hand. It felt different the second time, heavier but also cleaner. The way a room feels after you have taken everything out of it and decided deliberately what deserves to come back in. The weeks after the conference room were not dramatic. Dramatic was for the movies. Real life after something like that was mostly paperwork and phone calls, and the particular exhaustion of a man who had been holding himself together under sustained pressure for 3 months, and was only now slowly beginning to put the tension down. The asset freeze orders came through. The accounts unlocked in stages as the court verified each one. Michael filed the fraudulent conveyance motion on Lake Arrowhead, and the California courts cooperated faster than anyone had expected. The property deed was back in my name by the 3rd week of January. I did not go to see it, not yet. I was not ready to stand in front of that cabin and feel whatever it was I would feel. Some things needed more time before you could face them, without your hands doing something involuntary. Some clients called to withdraw. I spoke to each of them personally, briefly, without drama. Carter Construction will be here, same as it always has been. 3 came back within 2 weeks. 2 did not. I noted both outcomes in the same column and moved on. I had built this company through a recession, through a financial crisis, through a pandemic that shut down half the job sites in New York for 4 months. I was not going to let it come apart because of what had happened in a conference room on the 28th floor on a Monday morning in December. Sophie called on a Tuesday morning in the 2nd week of December. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, which was how Sophie always began conversations she had already decided the outcome of. You need someone you trust in that office, someone who understands construction, understands the business, and isn't going to be impressed by the last 3 months in a way that makes them handle you carefully. A pause. "I'm not going to handle you carefully, Uncle William." "I know you're not," I said. "I start Monday," she said. "Unless you want to pretend to think about it for a few days, in which case I'll give you until Thursday." I looked out the window at 7th Avenue. Delivery trucks were stacking up at the intersection below. A man in a hard hat was arguing with a parking enforcement officer outside the building across the street. New York proceeding exactly as it always did. "Monday is fine," I said. She arrived at 8:45 with a laptop bag over one shoulder and a coffee from the place downstairs, in each hand, one for her. One for me, without being asked. She set mine on my desk, sat down across from me, opened her laptop and said, "Walk me through the current project pipeline. All of it. I want to understand exactly where we are before I have any opinions." She had been there for 1 hour before I realized I had laughed twice without noticing. It was not a large thing. She had made a comment about the filing system on the shared drive, something dry and precise about the way the previous administrative assistant had labeled folders as if she were trying to prevent anyone from ever finding anything, and I had laughed before I knew I was going to. It surprised me. Not the laugh itself, but the fact that it felt like mine. Like something that had been sitting in a drawer for 3 months had finally been picked back up. Sophie noticed. She did not say anything about it. She simply kept talking about the filing system, which was exactly the right thing to do. Ryan texted every week. The messages were short updates, mostly the kind you send when you are trying to demonstrate consistency rather than emotion. Week 2 of counseling. It's harder than I expected. A week later, week 3. I think I said something true today. Then counselor says the hardest part is learning, why not just stopping? Then at the end of January, simply, "I think I understand why now, Dad." I answered each one. Never long. "Good. Keep going. That's the most important thing you've said. I know you do." What I did not write in any of those replies was that I read each message twice before I answered, that I sat with each one for a few minutes before I typed anything back. Not because I did not know what to say, but because I wanted to make sure I was saying what was true rather than what was easy. Ryan had spent 3 years telling himself convenient things. The least I could do was refuse to do the same. Thomas Bray called once a month with a brief update on the federal cooperation process. The conversations were short and professional, and carried the measured tone of a man who had done this many times, and understood that the people he worked for did not need elaboration, only facts. Ryan was complying fully. The prosecutors were satisfied. The timeline was proceeding as expected. I thanked him each time and hung up and sat for a moment before I went back to work. One evening in February, I stayed late. Sophie had already gone. She left at 6:30 with the same reliability she brought to everything else, picking up her coat and her bag and saying goodnight without making a ceremony of it. The office was quiet except for the low hum of the building's ventilation system and the muted noise of 7th Avenue 28 floors below. I was reviewing the structural plans for a mixed-use project in Long Island City, the kind of work I had done 10,000 times and still found on certain evenings genuinely absorbing. I set the plans down and looked out at the city lights. 35 years I had been building things in this city. I had poured concrete in weather that would have stopped a reasonable man. I had argued with inspectors and suppliers and clients and occasionally my own better judgment. I had built things that were still standing and would be standing after I was gone, and I had failed to notice for 7 years that the foundation of my own home was crumbling from the inside. But buildings could be repaired. That was the thing about structures, they could always be repaired if you were willing to do the work and honest about what was actually damaged. The ones that could not be saved were the ones where people pretended the damage was not there until it was too late. I had spent 35 years understanding that principle as it applied to concrete and steel and load-bearing walls. It had taken me considerably longer to understand that it applied to everything else as well. I had been willing to look at the damage, that I decided was enough. My phone rang. Michael. "The judge reviewed our submissions this morning," he said. His voice carried something I had not heard in it for 3 months, the particular lightness of a man who has been holding his breath and has finally been given permission to exhale. "William, I need you at the courthouse tomorrow. Bring Sophie." A pause. "I think you're going to want someone there." I looked out at the city lights for another moment. Manhattan at night, from 28 floors up, looked the same as it always had, relentless and indifferent, and somehow still beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they have no interest in whether you find them so or not. Then I picked up my phone and sent Sophie a text: "Court tomorrow, 8:30. Wear something nice." Her reply came back in 40 seconds. "Already planned on it. Get some sleep, Uncle William." I smiled, a real one, unhurried, the kind that arrived without announcing itself, and turned off my desk lamp and went home. I wore the navy suit again. Not because I was superstitious, because it had worked once and I saw no reason to argue with that. Sophie was waiting on the steps of 60 Center Street when I arrived at 8:25. She was wearing a charcoal blazer I had not seen before, and her hair was pulled back, and she was holding 2 coffees from the place on Worth Street that she had apparently scouted the afternoon before, which was exactly the kind of thing Sophie did without announcing it. She handed me mine and said, "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been building toward this for 6 months," I said. "That's because you have been," she said. "Drink your coffee." Dr. James Whitfield was standing just inside the lobby doors. I stopped when I saw him. He was in a dark suit and a tie I recognized from his wife's funeral 6 years ago. His good tie, the one he wore when something mattered, and he looked at me with the expression of a man who had decided to be somewhere and needed no further justification for it. "James," I said, "I didn't ask you to come." "I know," he said. "I came anyway." He straightened his tie once. 20 years, William. You don't get to have the important days without me." I did not trust my voice for a moment. I nodded instead, and we walked in together. The courtroom was on the 4th floor. High ceilings, dark wood, the particular stillness of a room that had absorbed decades of difficult decisions and had developed a certain gravity as a result. Michael was already at the plaintiff's table, his briefcase open, his reading glasses on, a man completely in his element. Linda was seated at the defendant's table with her attorney. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in the way that people look smaller when the architecture they have been using to present themselves to the world has been taken apart piece by piece and laid on a conference room table in front of witnesses. She did not look at me when I sat down. Judge Patricia Warren entered at 9 o'clock exactly. She was in her late 50s, silver-streaked hair, pulled back severely, reading glasses on a chain around her neck that she put on and took off with the efficiency of someone who had no patience for wasted motion. She had been on the New York Supreme Court bench for 24 years, and she moved through the courtroom with the particular authority of a person who had heard every variation of every story and was no longer surprised by any of them. Michael presented the case in 94 minutes. He was thorough and unhurried and slightly devastating in the way that very good attorneys are devastating, not through drama, but through accumulation, document after document, transaction after transaction, the Article 81 petition, the forged signatures, the Lake Arrowhead deed, the Cayman accounts, the FBI recordings admitted under the Title III warrant that had been active for 18 months. Linda's attorney argued that she had been manipulated by Victor Hale, that she had not fully understood the implications of what she was signing, that she was a victim of a sophisticated predator. Judge Warren listened to all of it without expression. Then she put her reading glasses on and opened the folder in front of her and said in a voice that carried the calm authority of someone reading a measurement rather than rendering a judgment, "The court has reviewed the submitted evidence in its entirety." She turned a page. Mrs. Carter's claim of manipulation is not consistent with the documentary record. The Article 81 petition required her deliberate participation across multiple meetings with legal counsel over a period of 3 months. The recordings indicate she was an active and informed participant in the planning of the financial scheme, not a passive one. Linda's attorney started to speak. Judge Warren looked at him over her glasses. He sat back down. The fraudulent conveyance of the Lake Arrowhead property is confirmed, the judge continued. Ownership reverts to the marital estate immediately. The structured transfers totaling $340,000 are ordered returned from the frozen accounts. She turned another page. Carter Construction remains wholly under Mr. Carter's authority. The court finds no basis for any claim of diminished capacity, and the Article 81 petition is dismissed with prejudice. She looked up. Regarding the divorce settlement, New York equitable distribution law provides for fair division of marital assets. However, the court has broad discretion to adjust that division when one party has deliberately and systematically dissipated marital assets in anticipation of divorce. She looked at Linda directly. The court is exercising that discretion. Mrs. Carter will receive the minimum settlement provided by statute, nothing further. The room was very quiet. Regarding Ryan Carter, Judge Warren said, the court acknowledges the cooperation agreement entered into with federal prosecutors and notes Mr. Carter's full compliance to date. The civil court will not impose additional sanctions beyond those already agreed upon in the criminal cooperation framework. 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, 500 hours community service. She paused. Mr. Carter is also strongly encouraged to repay his creditors through legal means, which the court understands he has already begun to do. She closed the folder. Mr. Carter. She looked at me directly without the judicial distance she had maintained throughout. The court has reviewed 35 years of Carter Construction's financial records as part of this proceeding. This company was built by one person's discipline, one person's integrity, and one person's refusal to take shortcuts when the right way was harder. She paused. The court has no difficulty identifying who that person was. She stood. The room stood with her. Outside on the steps of 60 Center Street, the March air was cold and sharp and smelled like the city after rain. Michael shook my hand, both hands, which he had never done before. Ray gave me the small nod. Agent Reeves, who had come to observe, caught my eye across the steps and gave one brief professional nod that said everything it needed to say. Sophie walked straight to me and put both arms around me and held on. I knew it, she said into my shoulder. Her voice was thick. I knew it the whole time. Go home, I said. Get some rest? So do you, she said. She pulled back and looked at me with those direct brown eyes. Promise me. I promise, I said. She hugged me once more quickly and then walked toward the subway, her charcoal blazer disappearing into the mid-morning crowd on Center Street. Whitfield appeared beside me. He did not say anything. He simply stood there, his good tie catching the March wind, looking out at the street with the patient, unhurried presence of a man who understood that some moments did not require commentary. We stood together for a while. Then he said quietly, "That was exactly enough." "Yes," I said. It was. I looked out at the street for another moment. Then I reached into my coat pocket, an old habit checking for the ring box that had lived there for one Tuesday morning 6 months ago, and had not been there since. The pocket was empty. But I knew exactly where the ring was. And for the first time in 6 months, I knew exactly what it was for. 2 years is long enough to forget the shape of certain fears. Not forget completely, that was not how memory worked, and I had never been a man who believed in pretending otherwise. But long enough that the fear changes form. Long enough that it stops being the first thing you feel when you walk into a room and becomes instead something quieter, something that lives in the back of a drawer you no longer open every day. I was standing in a small room off the main hall of St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Greenwich, Connecticut, on a Saturday morning in September, tying my tie in the mirror above a narrow wooden dresser when I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and felt the familiar weight of the black velvet box. I had carried it from Michael's office the week before, driven it home myself, set it on the corner of my desk where the ring had sat on the morning of the trial, and looked at it for 3 evenings before I was certain I knew what I was going to do with it. I was certain now. Sophie's dressing room was 2 doors down the hall. I knocked. "Come in," she called. Then before I had the door fully open, "Uncle William, I swear if you're here to tell me I look nervous, I'm going to—" She stopped when she saw the box in my hand. She was standing in front of her own mirror in her wedding dress, ivory silk. Simple lines, the kind of dress that looked like it had been chosen by someone who understood that the person wearing it was the point, not the dress itself. Her hair was up. There were two small white flowers pinned above her left ear that I suspected had come from the garden in Greenwich that she had been tending since she moved into the cottage at the end of our street 18 months ago, after her lease in Brooklyn expired, and she decided, as Sophie decided, most things without drama and without announcement. Her eyes went to the box, then to my face, then back to the box. "Uncle William," she said softly. "Is that—" "Yes," I said. She pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling for a moment, a gesture I recognized as the one she used when she was trying to decide which feeling to let through first. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," I said. "I want to." I crossed the room and held the box out to her, and she took it with both hands the way you take something you understand the full weight of. She opened it slowly. The ring sat in its velvet bed, exactly as it had sat for 2 years in Michael's safe. Round cut, white gold, classic setting, the kind of ring that looked like it had been made to last. Her chin trembled. She pressed it still. "I bought this ring," I said, "to celebrate something I thought I understood. It turned out I was wrong about what I was celebrating." I paused. But I was not wrong about the ring. Some things are made for a purpose that takes a while to reveal itself. I looked at her. This young woman who had driven 40 minutes to sit with me at a restaurant on Greenwich Avenue when I needed someone to tell the truth, to who had arrived at my office on a Monday morning with coffee for 2 and started working before she took her coat off, who had texted me every Sunday for 2 years without missing one. "This belongs to you, Sophie. It always did. I just didn't know it yet." She made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something that lived in the narrow space between relief and joy, and she reached up and put one hand against my cheek, the way she had when she was 7 years old, and had decided that was how you told someone you loved them. "Thank you," she whispered. "Uncle William, thank you." I covered her hand with mine for a moment, then I stepped back. "Your guests are waiting," I said. "Go get married." She laughed, the real one, unguarded the laugh that had always reminded me of my sister at the same age, and turned back to her mirror. Ryan was in the third pew from the front when I came out into the nave. Dark suit hair combed shoulders straight. He looked, I thought, like a man who had been through something and had come out the other side of it, changed in ways that were not yet fully visible, but were already structural, the kind of change you could not see on the surface but could feel in the way a person carried their own weight. He stood when he saw me coming down the aisle. "Dad!" He extended his hand. I shook it and then pulled him in to briefly one hand on his back, the way fathers do with sons when words are insufficient and proximity says the rest. "You look good," I said. "I've been working on it," he said, a corner of his mouth turned up, not the easy grin I had watched him deploy his whole life, but something quieter and more considered. "Counselor says I'm making progress." "Your counselor is right," I said. We sat down together. The church filled around us, friends, colleagues, people Sophie had accumulated in the particular way that warm people accumulate others, through genuine attention and remembered details, and the willingness to show up when it mattered. Dr. James Whitfield settled into the pew beside me as the organ began its first notes. He was wearing his good tie again. He smelled like the same cologne he had worn for 20 years, which was a kind of continuity I had not known I needed until it was sitting next to me in a church pew in September. He did not say anything. He simply put his hand briefly on my shoulder, once firmly, the gesture of a man confirming that he was present and intended to remain so, and then folded his hands in his lap and looked toward the altar. The doors at the back of the church opened. Sophie appeared. She was walking slowly, one hand resting on the arm of her father, my brother-in-law, David, a quiet man from North Carolina. I hadn't seen since before all of this began, who had driven up the night before and shaken my hand in the parking lot and said simply, "Thank you for looking after her." And I had said, "She looks after herself," which was true. The white flowers above her ear caught the light. The ring was on her right hand for now, where she had placed it when she put it on in the dressing room, and it caught the light too briefly as she moved. She saw me in the third pew and her eyes went bright, and she smiled. Not the nervous smile of someone performing happiness, but the unguarded, full-face smile of someone who was simply, completely in the right place at the right time. I smiled back. Ryan leaned slightly toward me. "She looks happy," he said quietly. "She is," I said. We watched her walk toward the altar. I thought about a Tuesday morning 2 years ago, a terminal at JFK, a black velvet box in my left breast pocket, and a bouquet of white peonies over my shoulder, and 40 years of a life I thought I understood completely. I thought about standing at a column near Gate 4 with my phone in my hand, and the skyline of Manhattan visible through the terminal glass, watching something I had believed in for 4 decades quietly reveal itself as something different than I had known. I thought about 3 days in a hotel 12 blocks from my own home, a conference table on Park Avenue covered in documents, a coffee shop on West 47th Street where a man I had just met told me truths about my son that made my throat close, a room on Lexington Avenue where a small speaker played 4 seconds of silence and then 2 words that I would carry for the rest of my life. And I thought about this, all of it had been true. The hard parts and the quiet parts and the parts that cost more than I had budgeted for. All of it had happened exactly as it happened without editing. And I had walked through every room of it and come out the other side standing in a church in Greenwich in September with my son beside me and my cufflinks straight and a young woman I loved walking toward an altar wearing a ring I had bought to celebrate something that turned out to be this. Not what I planned, better than what I planned. The organ swelled. Sophie reached the altar. The minister smiled and opened his book and said in the particular warm voice of someone who meant every word of what he was about to say, "We are gathered here today." Whitfield's hand found my shoulder again, just briefly, just enough. I did not lose everything that Tuesday at JFK. I lost the version of my life that had never been completely true. And once I understood that, I realized I had been carrying something much lighter than I thought. If you have ever had a moment when patience turned out to be the most powerful thing you had, when waiting and watching and refusing to act before you understood, the whole picture made all the difference. I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you for being here with me today. Until next time, build carefully, build honestly, and never stop building. This has been my family story, and I am not proud of every chapter in it. For 40 years, I believed that working hard and trusting completely was enough. I was wrong. Family betrayal does not arrive with a warning. It arrives quietly through small decisions made by people who smile at your dinner table every Sunday. Do not be like me. Do not wait until a camera shows you what your own eyes refuse to see. Pay attention. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Trust what you feel in your chest when something is wrong, even when the person standing across from you is someone you have loved for decades. I am not a perfect man, but I believe, and I say this with real gratitude to God, that truth protects those who are willing to face it, even when facing it is the hardest thing they have ever done. Every family story has a moment where someone must choose between comfort and honesty. This was mine. Family betrayal leaves marks, but it does not have to leave ruins. If William's journey touched something in you, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the very end. Coming stories contain some fictional elements built around real human truths. If that is not for you, no hard feelings. But if you stay, I will make it worth every minute.